Our next speaker traveled all the way from the UK to be here. He spoke at yesterday's Electric Light and Power Executive Conference, and he has a lot of insight into the energy industry. I think you're going to be very interested in what he has to say. Michael Liebrich is the founder and chairman of the advisory board of Bloomberg New Energy Finance, the world's leading provider of research for senior decision makers in clean energy, carbon and power markets, advanced transportation, energy technology, and natural gas. Michael founded New Energy Finance in 2004 and acted as chairman and chief executive before selling it to Bloomberg LP in 2009. He serves on the high-level advisory group for the UN Secretary General's Sustainable Energy for All initiative. Michael has in the past served on the advisory board of the Clinton Global Initiative's Energy and Climate Change Working Group and on the selection panels for the Zayed Future Energy Prize and the World Economic Forum Technology Pioneers. He was a longtime member of the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Councils for Sustainable Energy and the New Energy Architecture. He has founded other organizations and served on other boards too many to mention. Michael obtained an engineering degree from the University of Cambridge and an MBA from Harvard. He was a member of the British ski team from 1986 to 1993, competing in 2 World Championships and the 1992 Winter Olympic Games in Albertville, France. Please welcome Mr. Michael Liebrich.
Thank you very much, and it's a real honor to be here. That's a great introduction, and I'm always a bit embarrassed when I get introduced as the Olympic skier, because I know what all of you are thinking. You're looking at me going, I wonder if he won. Well, let me just say that there's a clue that I was part of the British ski team. So, it's been great so far. I've been backstage listening to the speeches so far and this issue of the focus on the future. And I'll see if I have anything to add based on really the global experience. I do a lot of traveling around the world, and we have offices in Asia and across Europe. I travel across Europe a lot. And so I'll try and put a bit of a perspective on some of these big trends that we see based on that. And I always start by looking at the money. So what you see here, I hope you can see, that's the money invested around the world in clean energy. We call it clean energy. There are lots of definitions. For the purpose of this, these figures, this chart, we're talking about renewable energy, energy efficiency, power storage. It doesn't include nuclear, it doesn't include natural gas, and for various reasons it doesn't include large hydro. But the bulk of it is renewable energy. And you can see there, since 2004, it really surged, went up from under $100 billion per year globally to around $1/3 trillion per year. And it got there in 2011, that was the record. There was the financial crisis that hit partly before, partly after that, and so it came down for a few years. And of course, when the oil price dropped 15 months ago, everybody told me, authoritatively, that because of the low oil price, investment in renewable energy would now slow or stop. And what we see very clearly here is that it did nothing of the sort. It actually was in record territory in 2015. And we'll look a little bit into the reasons for that. Around the world, if you compare investment in renewable energy, this is now on the generating capacity, on the grid, on the roof, etc. Renewable energy in green, fossil in gray, and you can see in the last year, just over a year, renewable energy is now attracting more capital than fossil capacity. Those years when you could refer to renewable energy as alternative are well and truly over. And around the world, there's another myth, not only that renewable energy is alternative, but also that it's really only for rich nations. It's something that you can only afford once you're wealthy. It's not something for the developing world. And you see there in gray at the bottom of the chart the volume of investment in the developing world, and in green, the developed world. And last year, for the first time, there was more investment in the developing world than the developed world. And they're not doing it because it's an indulgence. They're doing it because it has now become economically viable in those parts of the world. Now, when I say developing world, a lot of that is China. The leading country for investment in clean energy is China, $110 billion last year, so it's around a third of everything is China. But we're also seeing other parts of the developing world very rapidly growing. South Africa, Mexico, Brazil coming off the boil, but we're seeing it really being picked up around the world. In the developed world, what we see is the US. That's the second largest country for clean energy investment, just under $60 billion invested last year. But we also see Japan, in the wake of Fukushima, moving away from trying to build out its nuclear fleet and building more renewable energy. And Europe, which was the cradle of large-scale renewable energy investment, has actually come off the boil considerably since 2011. And if it hadn't, then these figures for overall investment would have increased much more dramatically. Now, this has all happened much more quickly than the accepted wisdom would have suggested. What you can see here, I don't expect you to be able to read all of the numbers and figures, but you'll get an idea. Those lines are successive forecasts of growth. On the left is wind, on the right is solar. And I've used here the IEA, International Energy Agency, for whom I have huge respect. But those are their forecasts, and the little diamonds are the outturns. And I can add 2 more years to that. And what we see is that wind and solar, because they are smaller unit size, because they are rapid to build, because their economics are improving, outgrowing all of the accepted forecasts. I used IEA, I could have used your own EIA, I could have used any of the large energy forecasts from oil and gas industry and so on. And I think we're going to continue to see this exact same pattern. We're also seeing companies, individual companies, building renewable energy capacity. So this started, there were some financial services providers who said, oh, we're going to go 100% renewables. Well, big deal. If you're a bank, that's not that hard. So we saw Bank of America, HSBC, big commitments. But then media and software companies, now some of these players have server centers. They've got more energy demand than just financial services players. Then we saw retail companies and fast-moving consumer goods companies committing to renewable energy. And they started maybe by buying certificates, but now they're actually building the resources themselves. It's gotten into manufacturers. You see there some of the brands that have committed to renewable energy, and even into primary industry. Why would a company like Dow Chemical build renewable energy capacity? The answer is because it is a way of managing and reducing and hedging its energy costs. There is, of course, a reason behind this, but it's not really Paris. You know, we've had this meeting at the end of last year, the agreement, the Paris Agreement, which said that the world must achieve greenhouse gas neutrality sometime in the second half of the century. But you know, is that what's driving this shift towards renewable energy? You know, Paris Agreement is not binding, can be criticized for that. In fact, it's not binding in the same way that the NATO agreement is not binding. It is a binding framework within which your contributions, your actions are actually voluntary. But that's not what's driving this dramatic and accelerating shift to clean energy. What is is the reducing costs. You can see here, this is the costs of utility-scale solar PPAs here in the US, starting 2008, going through to 2015. And as I'm sure many, if not all of you know, you're seeing PPAs being signed at 5 cents per kilowatt hour and below. And that's down so dramatically. Costs of solar down by 85% in the last 5 years. In wind, there you can see the dots are PPAs, the line is the wholesale price, and as I'm sure you're aware, you're seeing PPAs being signed around 2 cents per kilowatt hour, 2-3 cents. Now those numbers are after subsidies, the ITC, the investment tax credit, the PTC, the production tax credit, but you're talking about now wind and solar prices prior to subsidies that are in the zone of 3, 4, 5, 6 cents per kilowatt hour, unsubsidized. And we're seeing that around the world. We're seeing solar being bought in India at 6 cents, in Dubai at 6 cents. We're seeing wind in Morocco, unsubsidized, that's been bought at 3 cents, 3 US cents per kilowatt hour in Morocco. So this stuff is not going away. Now, it's not easy to manage because, of course, the sun doesn't shine at night and the wind doesn't always blow. But when it's that cheap, utility after utility, consumer after consumer, company after company has to buy some at least and figure out how to integrate it. Let's get a little bit of context here because it's not just about renewable energy. Really where we are is we're in an extraordinary age of energy plenty. There are all sorts of cheap energy sources, and that puts the focus very much on competition. Plentiful supply, who is going to capture the customer? Part of the background to this, though, is that this is primary energy demand in gray and GDP growth here in the US in green. Part of the background is we are no longer in an era of demand growth. I'm going to give you an example now from Australia. I'll tell you why I choose Australia in a minute. There's GDP growth in red and electricity demand on the grid in green, and that was 2010. And there was the forecast of the grid operator. What's going to happen next? Within 6 months, a huge shortfall. Another forecast, another shortfall, another forecast, another shortfall, another forecast, another shortfall. And I would like, at that point, there was some deep thought about how they're forecasting, and I'm happy to say that they are now clients of Bloomberg New Energy Finance. Why did I choose Australia? Because if we did the exact same thing for many states in the US, you'd see the exact same result. The forecasts from even as recently as 5-6 years ago, for 2020, you're now looking at 25% or more lower outturn. So the environment is of lack of growth in electricity demand. Maybe here in Orlando, with the amazing growth we've been hearing about from the mayor, it might be a little different, but across the US, this is the picture. Gas prices. There you've got natural gas, the bottom line there in green, that's the US, extraordinary low gas prices as a result of fracking. That is Europe, that is Asia, with LNG, with exports from Cheniere and others here in the US, overinvestment in Australia, overinvestment around the world in LNG pretty much. We're going to see low gas prices globally. Coal, that's the coal price. 2 different indices of coal price per ton. You can see exactly what's happening. What have we seen? These are coal companies. We've seen Patriot go out of business, Boomi in Europe and Asia, James River, Walter Energy. Alpha Natural Resources put up a bit of a fight. They said, we fuel progress around the world. Well, not anymore, you don't, not out of Chapter 11. And most recently, Arch Coal this year. Now, what is the great hope? to stimulate demand and really to change the game, and that is electric vehicles. There you've got the fabulous Tesla, which changed the game for all car manufacturers around the world. And as we all know, the batteries are the problem. They're too expensive. But the Washington Post is very confident. Prices on electric cars will continue to drop until they're within the reach of the average family. Can't disagree with that. Except that was written in 1915 about one of those. But we remain bullish. We do a lot of work on experience curves, a lot of work on prices. Battery prices came down 35% last year. This year they'll come down maybe 10%. And then next year they'll come down more because of the various gigafactories, not just Elon Musk's, but also Panasonic's and others. And we see the price of batteries coming down. We're about to see in the market a bunch of cars which hit a very interesting price point. $30,000 to the consumer, 200 miles range, the Chevy Bolt, the VW e-Golf, fastest selling electric vehicle in Norway, which is the leading country for this stuff at the moment, the Nissan Leaf, and the Tesla Model 3. These are game-changing cars because they're in the range of the average family, decent range, not too expensive. The other reason we're bullish on electric vehicles is this. That's Beijing's air quality. But it's not just Beijing. I am on the board of the Transport Authority in London, and I'm ashamed to say that is London. And if that doesn't convince you, maybe that does. So these are powerful drivers for the electrification of vehicles, and I think for many of you in the audience, that is very good news. But if we go back to renewable energy, now this is variable, intermittent renewables, and where are we today? 2014, you'll see there Germany, top right, 16% variable renewables in 2014, the leading nation with its energy transition. By 2040, play these trends out, and that is where you'll be. Germany, 77% variable renewables. Australia, 52%. US, from 2014, 4 or 5%. I believe 2015 was something like 6 or 7%. 24% variable renewables. This is a very different electrical grid that you'll all be managing. Now, the Pope, renowned for, among other things, his energy analysis, not yet a client of Bloomberg New Energy Finance, last year came out with a very impressive, very well, deeply thought out encyclical, Laudato Si', and said that there's still a need to develop adequate storage technologies. And he's certainly right. I wouldn't say His Holiness is wrong. But I will quote here Boris Schucht, who manages 50 Hertz in Germany. It's the East German network. And he says, we are running 42% variable renewables. Don't give me storage. I don't need storage until we get to 70%. And the reason he's saying this is creating a liquid market to balance supply and demand, going from half-hour settlement to 15 minutes to 5 minutes and below, using the software of demand response. Bits are always cheaper than kit. That is what Mr. Schucht says he needs. So what we're going to see is this tremendous competition for the customer. There's endless supply, cheap renewables, cheap coal, cheap gas, cheap nuclear if you've got some and you don't have, if the regulator lets you keep it. We're going to see new services. We're already seeing new services being provided by existing utilities. We're seeing new startups. We're seeing big companies entering the business, getting into the energy space, companies that are not normally associated with energy, telecoms companies, ADT, a home security company, getting into the provision of energy services. And we're going to see new bundles, maybe even new companies, elp-telcos, that provide both power and also telecom services in one bundle to the either retail or commercial consumer. So my closing thought, and I'll go back to, this is Mike Niggli, who was the keynote speaker in 2013, former CEO of Nevada Power, president and CEO of SDG&E. And something that he said, not on this stage because it was in San Diego, but what he said is, there's a lot of great technology, but it's always about our customers. How we can make their lives more comfortable and as inexpensive as possible. And what he says is really very, very important. In that world of very cheap supply, that fight for the customer, there's really only one strategy that is guaranteed to win. Only one strategy that is guaranteed to win. Hiding behind the coattails of regulators is not that strategy. Selling real products and real services to real customers is the only strategy guaranteed to win. Thank you very much.